Good morning and welcome to CTL's Technology Symposium. We have a number of very interesting sessions for you this morning, followed up by the technology bites that you've already seen set up in the main foyer. I'd like to get started right away because they're on a very tight schedule and I've only given them 8 minutes to give their talk, so I'm going to be very brief in my introductions. I'm Norma Nocenti. I'm the Associate Director in CTL, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. The first panel discussion we have is focused on trying to move your course in an online environment, and we have three individuals who are going to talk about their experiences of moving their courses into an online format. And there's a variety of online formats, and I'll let them get into that description. First, we have Dr. Amanda Montgomery from the Department of Elementary Education. Next, we have Dr. Sean Gugalis, who is the Director of Interdisciplinary Studies and an Associate Professor in Humanities Computing. And we have Erica Smith, a PhD candidate, but also a Senior Instructional Designer at the University of Alberta's Faculty of Extension. Now, the format this morning will be each speaker will have about 8 minutes to present what it is they've done and the process they're thinking that they went through and the challenges and opportunities that they saw emerging in that process. So I'm going to ask them to speak for 8 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next speaker and then the next speaker, and we have at the end 10 minutes for open questions. So I'd ask that you sort of hold your questions for the very end, make a note of them, and then we'll open up the floor. So without further delay, I'd like to bring up Dr. Amanda Montgomery.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Norma. And welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming in on a beautiful sunny day. It's going to be 29 degrees today, so that's wonderful that you're here. I'm delighted to be able to share some of the work that my team has been doing over the last few months. I've been very lucky to be supported in this move to blended and online learning from EdTech Services, which is our Ed Technology division in the Faculty of Education. And I've had two wonderful people on my team, Carol Tonhauser, who's an instructional designer, who I think is on the program a little bit later today, and also Connie Ewan, who's a wonderful Master of Education student. So everything I'm talking about today, they should be standing right beside me because it's very much been a team effort. Just a couple of things. The course that we have moved over to both blended and online is EdL 325, which is Curriculum and Pedagogy in Elementary School Music. It's one of 7 C&P courses, as we call them, in the Faculty of Education that Bachelor of Education students take who are elementary majors. So other courses are like mathematics, language arts, etc. And this particular course, the purpose of this course is to build teacher capacity in our pre-service teachers as they go out in terms of learning in music and learning through music. So they're learning about pedagogy to teach the program of studies, so things about music, but also they're learning about pedagogy that will, with music, that will support other subject areas like language arts or mathematics. It's very much a course that's a blend of theory and hands-on, and in some ways I think it's like a science course because you've got the big group lecture, if you would, and then the lab where someone goes out and actually applies. And although we don't have big group lecture, we actually have face-to-face talk, and then we have at least in the past, it's all been face-to-face. The current structure, or the structure before I started in, was an inquiry and constructivist-based kind of pedagogy. And the course has been, up till now, offered in face-to-face sections of about 40 each. A couple of challenges I should tell you about, because our job this morning, and I'm talking very quickly because I only have the 8 minutes, and I want to get as much in as possible. When I was asked to do this, my first thought was, okay, I have a little bit of experience because I had been teaching blended and online courses at the graduate end for 2 or 3 years. But as we know, graduate teaching and undergraduate teaching are very different things. And one of the challenges for me, at least in my own department, there were very few, if any, undergraduate models, certainly that were all blended. Luckily, there was one model in our faculty, EDU 200, which is a technology course, that had the year before moved over to blended. And I used that a lot as a guide for me to see some of the things that were possible. The other challenge, I think, was probably when you look at the literature in blended learning, a lot of blended learning got started to try to take the big section courses and make them more hands-on. In other words, move some of it online so that students would have that opportunity to engage individually with the material, and then they would have part of the time with the lecture. But my class was already very hands-on. So the challenge for me was not to take something and move it online and make it more engaging. It was to take material that was already engaging and hands-on, and how could I put that online? And that was a real challenge to get started. The first thing I did was read the literature on blended learning. And that may seem like a very academic thing to do, but it was the smartest thing I did. It saved me a tremendous amount of time because, of course, blended learning isn't new. It's been around, the literature is 15 or 20 years old. And so I was able to see what other people had had successes with, what the challenges were. And so I actually designed my course up front with some of the ideas that other people had already come up with. The important thing for me was to find out that the definition, at least in the literature, allowed me a lot of freedom. First of all, that it was supposed to be thoughtful integration. It wasn't just going to be me taking 50% of my course and put it online, which didn't appeal to me at all. I also read about the fact that the mixture of the amount that's online and the amount that's face-to-face is quite variable. So somebody might do 20/80, somebody might do 40/60. I chose to do 50/50, so that was my commitment that I made. And the other part of it that was very appealing to me was that if I was going to do this, I really had to transform my whole course. And that was perhaps one of the greatest learning moments I had, that transforming 50% to move online was transforming 100% of the course. Because anything you move off face-to-face to move online, of course, changes the dynamics of your face-to-face. The other gift, I suppose, of this process was, as an academic, we do change. We probably tweak 10 to 15% of our courses every year. We do that. But who has time to do 100% transformation? So this was a wonderful opportunity for me, not just to make it blended, but to really make my course that much better. In the early goals, as I already said, for blended learning, it was mostly about trying to make a course more constructivist, more inquiry-based, which was already a part of mine. But what really caught my attention was the idea of the flipped classroom. And of course, blended and flipped are two different things. Blended is simply part of your course is online and part of your course is face-to-face. And the flipped idea is that we move, whatever the material is that moves online, the students have engagement with that material first, independently, before they come to the face-to-face. And so that's what I chose to do. So my students in my course do the theory part, if you would, individually online, then they come and they actually do interactive activities with that. So it's flipped in terms of the standard way I used to not lecture, but talk to my students, and then they would go off and do assignments. I had to, because I guess I'm in education, I had to come up with some theoretical frameworks for myself. So my team developed what we call the ears of learning: explore, apply, reinforce. And in a nutshell, the explore part would be what the students would do individually in the online component with a variety of learning objects. The apply part was when they would come to the face-to-face and have the collaborative, inquiry-based kinds of instruction. And the reinforcement was when they could go back to those materials, review them as many times as they needed online, do the assignments, those kinds of things. And how it looks in the terms of my actual course, I designed 10 units. A unit is just a topic area of a particular subject. There's 20 modules, so approximately 2 modules per unit. And then we have this idea of the EAR, or explore, apply, reinforce. I should also say that at the same time that I was doing this, I was also designing the course to be a fully online course. So EdL 325 now has a blended version and fully online. And the way the online worked, at least for this first pilot that I did last spring, I forgot to mention that, is the face-to-face component for the online became the synchronous Adobe Connect sessions. And because we do so much hands-on work with concrete materials, manipulatives, those kinds of things, because of course, remember, my students are learning how to be teachers with kindergarten children, with grade 2 children, etc. I made up little kits that I sent out to my online students because that was part of the ATEP program, or Aboriginal Teacher Education Program, that we have through the Faculty of Education. And so I sent them what we call the ATEP Music Toolkit. And so in that toolkit, they had all kinds of materials that they could use during the synchronous portion of our course, which would have been the same kinds of things we would have done face-to-face. So I've brought a little video to show you today, and I think it works better through the QuickTime here. So I'm going to put it up here. I think that's our QuickTime version. And that's not. Okay. And I brought this little video to show you because one of the things that I think you do when you move to blended is you have to come up with learning objects that make sense for your particular discipline. There is no formula for blended. There is no formula for online. It's all dependent on what your discipline is and what you need. For me, if you remember, I needed hands-on way. How was I going to take these hands-on things and move them to online? So I came up with a learning object I call a mini pedagogical vignette. And these are 2 to 3 minute little short videos where I'm demonstrating a teaching technique that you might use with students. So I've just brought this to show. And when Norma gives me the 2-minute warning, which she just did. Okay.
Manipulating concrete objects is also another good way. As you saw in the other little vignette when we did the shell, the snail shell that went up the arm. In this case, I've collected rocks just from out on a walk in the woods, and I've collected a variety of rocks. And the children, I could give those to the children, and they could write out, if you would, using these manipulatives, the melodic contour. So if I was to do that,
And
the children would, Johnny works with one hammer, and for one hammer,
and just try to get back to my own PowerPoint here. Can you help me with that for a sec? Yeah. Am I just on it already? Perfect. Oops. Yeah. My fault. Yeah. Perfect. Not sure why the audio was, the mouth wasn't simultaneous there for some strange reason, but you got the idea. So that's the kind of thing. I have like 30 seconds left, Norma, real quick. Out of time. Okay. I'll leave you with these slides. This was just a couple of thoughts while Sean's coming up, just things that were important to me in this process. I hope that gives you a little idea, and if you have a question, you can ask me later, and I will turn off my microphone.
Thank you. Is that on? Am I not on, Mike? Is it? Okay, sorry. Okay, so the course I want to talk to you about that I teach is STS 350, which is a course called Understanding Video Games. Now, this is a course that I've taught for a couple of years now, and it tries to deal with some of the basic principles that go into the making and the analysis of video games. So this course will cover everything about the differences between play and game. It'll look at the differences between what's emergent play and what's progressive play. It'll look at the culture of video games. So you can imagine there's geek culture and conventions and Minecraft and all that sort of stuff we talk about. And we also talk about some of the more seedier sides of computer games, sex and violence in video games, some of the positive elements of that, and then, of course, some of the negative elements of that. This Understanding Video Games course is one course that's part of a certificate in computer game development that we'll be taking in its first class this year. And all of those courses, there are 10 courses of which the students need to do 6 of them, have sort of 3 pedagogical imperatives, some of which you've heard already. All of the courses in this certificate are constructivist, and what I mean by that is the students have to build their own video games. They build their own object of study in order to better understand the process by which we go about analyzing video games. The second is that everything is done in teams. And the reason we do that is that video game production and video game analysis is all interdisciplinary and team-based. In fact, there's this misperception that everyone is a coder. But if you look at any large video game company like BioWare, for example, in Edmonton, the percentage of computing science people in that course, in that company, are only about 18 to 19%. And that's true across most video game companies. So we have creative writers, and we have graphic designers, 3D modelers, storytellers, level designers, and computer programmers. And the point of the courses are for these students to work together so that they learn the sort of language that each discipline speaks, and they can speak to each other and become this sort of informed middle ground about video game production. And the last thing is that the students have to build a complete game, meaning no prototypes, no models. Everything that they have to do has to be working towards a complete game so that they can, at the end of this certificate, have a sort of, help me out, portfolio of games that they can show to an employer, perhaps. This is kind of the principle of all of the courses in this certificate. Well, STS 350 was one of the courses in February that was chosen to be a pilot course for the MOOC experiment that the University of Alberta had taken on. Now, how do you then go about taking a course that does STS 350, that does all of those things, and try and put it into a MOOC? How do you have a constructivist MOOC? How do you have an idea? And I mean, an STS is an arts course. So we have a lot of essays in STS, or we have essays in STS, and we have a lot of reflective writing that goes on about the team-based experience, meaning what did you learn, what was the learning outcomes that you managed to take out of this, that sort of thing. So how do you translate all of that into a MOOC? And then, how do you deal with some of the real problems that we have with MOOCs? I mean, we saw this sort of groundswell of MOOCs being, you know, the next great messiah coming down from the mount. And now we've seen the sort of counter to that of, this really isn't solving any of our problems. And the challenge is both, right? I mean, it can be great, and it can also be awful. I mean, if there's one defining characteristic about what a MOOC is, it's the fact that 90% of the students drop out. So that's probably a great definition of what a MOOC is when you're talking about these things. So how do we actually beat that problem? And how do we do it in an arts course that has a lot of sort of long-form essay? How do we go about automated assessment of long-form studies? Now, assignments. So a friend of mine or a colleague of mine in education is trying to challenge that aspect of it. We're trying to find some of the middle ground aspects of that. And some of the things that we're doing are things like a paragraph tagger, for example, where students are trying to sort of identify components of an essay and identify components of their own essay, so they learn a little XML. It can all be automated or procedurally assessed. They can get feedback immediately, that sort of thing. The other thing that we're doing is a sorting mechanism so that they will be given a task to, for example, here are 10 games. Tell me which ones from 0 to 1 to 10, 0 to 9, the computer brain kicked in there for a second. From 1 to 10 have the need story the most, right? So you rank them. And then all of that material is then fed back into the system. Your answer is then compared to the average of the 100,000 students taking it, and you discuss that on the forum, right? So there's an interesting reflective exercise. But the one I really want to talk about is this sort of And I love your feedback on this one because we're still working through it all and we're still developing this and we're going to prototype in September and then run the thing live in January, is something called the avatar creator, which we're working on right now. And what that is a sort of paper doll creator. And if you've ever played a video game, particularly a role-playing game, you have to build a character at the start of it. So you can be a dwarf or an elf or whatever color skin you want to have or whatever gender. You can do all these sorts of things. If you played Saints Row 2, they have like this gender slider, which is fantastic. You can kind of pick what gender you want to be. And you can change it throughout the course. Anyway, so we're doing this character avatar so that the students will have a sort of personified representation of who they kind of want to be in the forums. And then we're trying to figure out ways that we can use that to increase completion rates. So one of the things we're doing is adding elements of gamification to the course. And I'll talk about whether gamification is actually anything useful later, but what I mean by that is, let's say you finish all of the quizzes in that lesson. What that gets you then is a new hat, or a new cat that sits beside you, or a pet. And so you flesh out your avatar creator. And it sounds silly, but this is exactly what happens in computer games, right? You look at Diablo 3, your character is represented by this character that gets fleshed out the more you complete the game. So the same thing's going to take place in this course. The other thing we're going to do is, in the course on sex and video games, and violence in video games, and race in video games, we're going to have the students create something called the avatar. Now that's a character from a series called Ultima. If there are any other geeks in the crowd, you'll know what I'm talking about. But what that means is students are going to go about creating a hero. Go and build us a hero. So you have 100,000 people who build a hero. We have some demographics of who's taking the course. And isn't it funny that even though 50% of the students are women, 90% of the heroes were male? Right? Just so feedback that information back to the students about their own activities so that they can reflect upon what it means to be a hero in a video game to sort of get an idea about how video games reflect or don't reflect what it actually means to be human in reality. Same thing with race, same thing with height and clothing and all that sort of stuff. We're going to try and feed back into it. So it's a kind of cute little exercise, and we'll see if we can sort of increase the completion rates in the course. But then the last thing we're going to do with that section is the second last lesson in the course is on gamification. So we're going to talk about the process of gamifying the course and use the exercise that they went through and the meta-analysis of that material to then sort of try and talk about what gamification actually is. And what's the difference between gamification and pointification? Oh, you got a gold star. Congratulations. That's pointification. Gamification is, oh, I've earned enough to actually get some sort of power. So why don't we give students power within the course, for example, based upon their completion of the elements of the quizzes, the amount that they flesh out in their avatar. So, for example, let's say they can become a moderator in the forum. Right? It's like something that allows them to reflect back on the process that they're actually going through in terms of the gamification of the course. So, 8 minutes is about time to describe breakfast. But that's about as best as I can do, I think, for trying to give you 8 minutes about what we're trying to do in this SDS course about understanding video games. Thank you.
Is that on now? Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm pretty excited to be here this morning, not only because I've attended pretty much most of the CTL sessions, but also to see the work of my colleagues and also my former, I don't know what you would call it, instructor, teacher. The full process is coming back together because Sean, I did my MA in humanities computing and he was actually on my committee, so it comes back around. It's funny. So this morning I'm going to talk about applied land use planning, but more specifically I'm going to be in broad strokes talking about the design process that we used for this applied land use planning certificate in the Faculty of Extension. So I'm hoping to look at the process, pedagogies, and principles informing that recent online course design and delivery in ALUP, And we did quite a few courses. The entire certificate is online, and in my time with the faculty, I looked at approximately 6 different fully online and a few blended courses as well. I should mention I have colleagues in the audience from Extension who worked on some of those projects as well, and Brian Brawl in the back did some blended work, and Wade Kelly, the other instructional designer with Leo, is in the crowd as well. So our Learning Engagement Office has a team of 2 e-learning specialists, an e-learning developer, 2 instructional designers, and our executive director. And we use that team to look at learning design and delivery throughout the instructional development process. We really do look at it as this iterative process, something that's ongoing. And we look at supporting things throughout the course life cycle. So that iterative process involves, not unlike what you would see in a lot of instructional design textbooks, right? Needs analysis. So we did, for the ALUP course in specific, we worked with our research group to do a survey of needs and to get an idea of what the learner characteristics were. So really, who are these learners and who are we talking about specifically? What are their needs? In this case, it was very much to start with a professional group. So professional planners have master's degrees, but there's many folks who work as clerks in planning offices and have a whole range of different roles in the process of development, design of city planning. And so we're really figuring out a way to make education accessible for that wide variety of group and learners. The instructional design process was program-wide, so we did some program mapping at the curriculum level across that entire certificate. So how do all the course pieces fit together, what's covered where, and what should be covered and overlapped where, and intentionally rather than accidentally overlapping content or laddering things. And then course-specific, we would look at those objectives and go through a process with an advisory board of professionals and then also with academic advisors to be sure that the content was the best that it could be. Then when all of that was done, we would do some training and development of the instructors. Many times we would use subject matter experts who did have a background in planning. They had were accredited through the planning organizations in Canada, and we would look at having them work with us to develop the course materials and then transition to an online environment. So we would make that process supported. Some were really keen to teach online, and some were very reluctant or tentative, I would say. And I'd say in the end, after every experience, the instructors felt that the experience in those particular courses was successful, regardless of whether they were excited or kind of worried at the beginning. So that was a real plus from our perspective. And at the end, we take a look, we do a bit of an analysis of that pilot data and try to do an evaluation to see where for the next course offering we need to update and refine. So as I mentioned, we have quite a team working on the process. The instructional designer has kind of 2 hats in terms of project management, making sure things get done, and then also the pedagogy, making sure that the course design is meeting all of the goals and principles. So if we want problem-based learning, how do we do that in an online environment? How can we do design in an online environment for urban design, those kinds of problems. We also have an academic advisor, Dr. Kyle Whitfield, in the faculty, whose background is in planning, and she was available to us as well. We had many subject matter experts, external reviewers who we would say, you're not at all familiar with this course, but you are an expert in this area of rural planning. What do you think of it? And give us some feedback before the course even launches. We did have an editor hired, a PhD student in English in this case, who worked with all of the materials to help edit to be sure it was clear in terms of reading and so forth. We had the program staff who would coordinate things, do marketing for the program, that kind of thing, and then an e-learning specialist to help build and support the process all throughout. And that's not even mentioning, we work quite closely actually with the CTL team, and we go back and forth with a lot of those staff members to make sure that we have all of the up-to-date technology, and many of our students contact them with questions as well. So it really is that kind of hub-and-spoke model with localized, contextualized, project-specific support. And then we're feeding into the university to try to realize those economies of scale and collaborative community of practice items. So just a few screenshots from some of the courses that were my favorite. I'm probably not supposed to have a favorite, but I do. So Municipal Planning 2, there is a Municipal Planning 1 course, and that's kind of an introduction to what is planning. Municipal Planning 2 is really that second level, and we had an opportunity to do a lot of really fun things with the design. So in this case, it's hard to kind of get a sense of what's going on here, many different screenshots, but I'll try to explain them as I go. So this is an example of, we basically created for each module, and there's 6 modules for a 39-hour course. We created almost like a mini textbook from scratch, because really there was no textbook. We had a grant from the government of Alberta to do this project because truly there was a need for planners in the community, and there is a new BA, BSc starting at the university as a collaboration between science, extension, and arts. And we're involved in that now, but this is kind of before or in the early days of that process. So we were looking around and trying to tie into existing textbooks, but really had the grant to make our own. You know, at the end of the day, all the modules together would probably be about 90 pages, which is why we had an editor on staff. In this case, Colton Kiersop, who was the subject matter expert and instructor, had a great collection. He just has a passion for planning and design, and he takes lots of pictures. So he gave us all of his pictures to use, open access. And this is an example in Edmonton of a really innovative front porch design, in his opinion. So we would try to embed these pictures as we talk about things like smart growth in that kind of mini textbook or module format. And then Colton, we looked to design. We wanted students to actually do some design as a part of the course. And we thought, how do we do that when they're online and they're used to submitting essays to us? So what we did was we worked with Google Maps, and we created a scenario. This is assignment A. We looked at a certain plot of land. And we also created some Flickr books with all of Colton's fabulous collection of planning images. And we used those 2 things to try to get students to look at what is the kind of blank slate and how can you design. So your assignment is to design an innovation for this using these design principles. How would you take that? At first, students are a little nervous that they don't have graphic design skills, or they're not experts in this, that, the other. But really, we tell them, submit in whatever format you're comfortable with. So if you want to print it off and draw something and then take a picture of it, no problem. If you want to do something in Visio, no problem, and so on. And so students are really enabled to choose the tools that make sense to them that they're going to use in their professional practice. We had a lot of PowerPoint submissions and Word submissions and that kind of thing. So that was a pretty exciting development, and I think the students really got a lot of hands-on kind of problem-based learning skills through that availability of letting them choose their poison, as it were, in terms of design. Another example here is our Urban Environments course, which is a 21-hour face-to-face course that I worked to design. Thank you. And Brian created a blended section of that subsequently. This is exciting, I think, because we thought, urban design is all around us, so why would we sit in a classroom in downtown and not get out and try to go see some of the design features? So on the last day of the course, we actually do a site tour through 104th Street, which is one of our favorite areas to hang out as a team, actually, on our lunch breaks. It's a really great example of some innovation and design. And then they kind of walk through certain downtown corridors and look to apply design principles or look for certain trends, like economic trends near the railway or historical trends that may happen. And that, I think, was a really successful endeavor, and the blended format helps to build on that. So really taking the most, making the face-to-face the best use of time, things that you can't otherwise do, and then using the online to do some other course management items. Municipal planning management, and it's hard to see here, but Beth Sanders, who does a lot of kind of mind mapping and uses art of hosting in person, was new to the online environment with us as well. And we tried to work with her to do career mapping for students. So this idea of Mintzberg's messy projects or really wicked projects, or problems rather, we tried to take that idea from a systems approach and have students, and this is Beth's example of drawing out the systems, but have students, again, choose their poison to draw out whatever systems they're working within and to try to get a picture and capture that messy problem, and then write an analysis of that. So that was very new for some of our students. The exciting thing is these online courses have run many times now, probably in their third or fourth iteration. And there's 2 online courses approved now for credit. Extension approved the rural environments and regional planning courses. And both will be accepted from a non-credit format to a credit format in the BSc BA in planning. And they're also available as non-credit for professionals in ALUP, as I mentioned. So I think, again, one of the exciting things is the flexibility here, so that we can take non-credit audiences and we make it for credit and vice versa, credit for non-credit, and really give the learners the experience and the ability to chart their own learning path. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I not break that down? Science, Technology, and Society. It's an undergraduate minor in the Office of Interdisciplinary Studies, which is my area, in the Faculty of Arts. I don't think I unpacked MOOC either, if anyone doesn't know what that is. Massive online open course. Pardon? Can we all have them on at the same time? MOOC is a massive online open course, 100,000 students at one time taking a course.
I'm not sure what you mean by format. That's a great question. A variety of learning objects. So there were some of the videos like what you saw. There are textbook readings. There's article readings. They go online. There's quite a few Web 2.0 tools that they do because I was trying to build in technology within the process as well. So the students go to offline sources. So I think just as that was one of the things that I tried to do to make it as engaging as possible is make sure the learning objects were as diverse. So it's a variety of things. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, the question was about flipped learning and how the flipped learning fit in terms of online instruction. And then I think your question is, how do the students react during the online part to if it still has textbook readings and the learning objects as well? So I should clarify that the flipped learning was a commitment I made before I started. So, and again, that was partly because my course was already constructivist and inquiry-based, so I had to do something that made it even more interesting from that perspective. I also, from the reading that I did, it looked like flipped was the only logical way to go, which is sort of, I think, what you're saying you found in your own experience. This follows up with that question, but I have only done the blended twice now so far, so 2 in the spring and then 2 at the online. I also have a textbook, and I also have research readings, but I think the key is to have diversified learning objects. You have to have some video, you have to have some audio, I have some podcasts. And in my particular class, because it's a performing arts class, students actually learn how to play an instrument, a recorder, which is a simple wooden flute type instrument that the children play, and so the teachers have to learn how to play it as well. And that was the most interesting one, because like the video that you saw, they watch that first to learn how to play, then they come to class and play it together, and then they have that opportunity to go back. So that was very powerful. I found better playing than when I used to do it the other way. But some students, undergrads, and I think that's the difference between undergrads and grad students, I had some students that would do all the learning objects, and of course we can keep track of that with eClass, and then they'd come to class and they'd say, "Teach me." So I do think that it's going to take some time to transform students to get them to have take more ownership in their learning. So it isn't just magical, or you create all these great learning objects and the students do them, because they're undergrads and they're undergrads.
Sure, yeah. So how can you translate your course if you don't have a team of people to support you and your faculty? Well, firstly, I would say, again, that CTL has a great number of resources that, and actually some of the workshops that they did on concept mapping and things that they put online in terms of concept mapping, I looked to and then thought, okay, how can I translate this online so that, and how can I get students to not feel constrained by the technology? Okay, just do whatever you think is best. It's the idea, it's not the technology that we're evaluating. So that is a really good place to start, because if you start with the pedagogy and start with some of the resources available, and there's many sites, ours is fantastic, and of course other universities have fantastic resources as well. Think about what you want to do pedagogically, and then yeah, I think we also have a community of practice called Online Program Support Group. And CTL is involved with that as well. And you know, it's a great way to say, okay, so what I want to do is concept mapping. Has anyone done that online? Or what I want to do is urban design. Has anyone done that online? So the community here, there's a lot of people at different faculties, at department levels, at faculty levels, at the university level doing technology. And so we can give you lots of resources and suggestions as well. Just
I would add to that anytime you're going to put any sort of thing that you've done before into a new environment, into a new digital environment, it will always take much longer than you think it will take. It will always be more expensive than you think it will be. And it will probably be almost as good as the way you were doing it before. And I cannot stress how much more difficult it was for us to rethink this entire course. I mean, I've taught this course before. When I walked into this, I thought, well, this won't be hard. You have to rethink your course from the ground up. And as was mentioned by Erica, though, there are a surprising number of resources. I don't know what faculty you're in, but most faculties or most faculty members will have access to a variety of teaching resources within, like arts, for example, has the Arts Research Lab, and a community of people who have thought about these issues before. You'd be surprised what's actually available here.
And if I can just reinforce that really quickly.
As well, there's lots of colleagues that are there. We're happy to share. I remember when I started online teaching in grad several years ago, Sue Gibson, who's in the audience, I hadn't taught online before. She kindly opened her course, let me look at it. And it's that kind of sharing among colleagues that really makes the difference. So there's us, there's quite a few people in the Faculty of Ed and around campus. So find those people through CTL, and I'm sure they'd be happy to share their ideas, because that's the only way to do it, is through sharing.
So with that, I'd like to draw this to a close. It's an excellent question, too, when we think about I believe in each of these cases, you see that